roll to hit. We don't have anymore. When you make an attack against somebody, you roll damage, and you deal them that damage. And that gets rid of the roll to hit, which is basically a roll to see if you have a turn.
Welcome to the Character Sheet, comicbook.com's official home for all things tabletop and fantasy. I am Christian Hoffer, and today I am joined by a very special guest. You probably know him if you are a subscriber to this YouTube channel. It is James Introcaso from MCDM Productions. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, I am great. It's awesome to be here, Christian. Thank you so much for having me. How are you? You are one of the busiest folks.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited, in part because we're talking about something that we have covered on this YouTube channel multiple times, and that is the MCDM RPG, which is a lot of letters which combined into something very pleasing for a lot of people. So let's dig into so by the time this video comes out, the RPG, the Backerkit crowdfunding campaign will be live. People are going to be knowing a lot about it. So the first thing I want to dive into is kind of like the secret origins of this game, which aren't so secret because, Matt has a YouTube channel that he talks about this thing a lot. But, let's talk about, how this RPG came into being, how you got involved, and how you assembled like a super team of creators to work on this.
Yeah, that's great. I had worked freelance with MCDM on some stuff before I worked with them full time. And when they hired me to work full time, in the interview I had with Matt, he said, what do you want to do in the future? Like, I know what our slate of projects is for the next couple of years, but what should we do after that? What are you really interested in doing? And I said, one of my concerns is that, like, I don't want to work on 5th Edition D&D for the rest of my life. I really like it, and it's a game that I have a lot of fun playing, but I don't want to do that forever. And he said, that's great, because neither do I. And I was like, excellent. This is the place for me. And so basically, from the time I started working there full time, he and I, in free time, would occasionally kick around ideas for, like, what was the game we wanted to make? What would that look like? If we could make our own RPG from the ground up, what would it be, right? And we had a lot of ideas. There are all sorts of things that we've talked about, everything from science fiction to dungeon crawling, and we kind of want to make all of them. Mm-hmm. But the first thing we said was, like, what about, like, for a flagship, hey, we're planning our flag, we're making a game, we want that to be big, we want that to be popular, and we want it to be something we really like. And we talked about heroic fantasy, right? And how a lot of D20 fantasy games have been trending towards more and more heroic, right? They've been leaving behind their wargaming and dungeon crawling roots, and the rules that they're coming out with, the way people are playing the games, look at Critical Role, right? It's more saving people than it is going to get treasure, right? And so we thought, it would be really cool if we leaned into that without the legacy of, like, you got to use a D20. You got to have a 10-foot pole in your list of equipment. You got to have rations, right? Why do you need those? Those things are not necessarily heroic, and we can get into why. And so we started to talk about that, and we started to build this game and formulate this game basically together. Whenever I would go out there to the headquarters in Irvine, and we would talk about it, and so we had some notes together, and then. It was sort of like we were, this is an analogy we've used around in the office. It was sort of like we had this rocket we were building in the backyard, right? Mm-hmm. And then the OGL incident happened, and it was like Hasbro came and lit that rocket for us. And now that rocket's getting ready to take off. So that's sort of how that all came to be, right? It was a thing we've always wanted to do. When the OGL thing happened, we thought, gee, even though it seemed like Wizards heard people and it resolved in a way that many people were happy with, we didn't want our future to be making DLC for somebody else's game. We wanted to have our own game and own it and be the masters of that destiny, because anybody could still take away that game at any time, right? Like, we were worried about that, or, this new edition that's coming out and all that kind of stuff. So it was like, the future is uncertain, and it's really uncertain if it's in somebody else's hands. So we should be the ones to make sure that we are securing our own futures. And this is the thing we want to do anyway. So let's go do it. So that's how it all kind of started. Since then, we've wrapped up all of our 5e commitments, and now we're starting to bring in freelancers who worked on books with us, like Flea Mortals and The Talent and The Beast Heart and Kingdoms and Warfare and Strongholds and Followers, right? We're bringing in those same people who made those products that folks loved with us and asking them to work on this RPG with us.
So I have so many questions that came out of it. I did want to address like the OGL thing really quickly, because you were at one point in time you were one of the best known like freelancers for 5e. Like, did you see that whole OGL thing like coming? And kind of like when you were like living through that, like the rest of us were, what were your like feelings about that?
Yeah, it was very shocking. And, I don't think I don't know the inner workings of Wizards of the Coast, right? And we don't have luckily Wizards of the Coast has talked about the people who made the decision and that sort of thing and why. And it seems like that doesn't fall on the design team or even like a big portion of the brand team. That came from like way higher up, right? And I was glad that way higher up seemed to then, when there was this public outcry, listen to people who were a little, more closely associated with the game, as well as the fans of the game and stuff. So I think that was good, and it turned out to be like a more open version of D&D now that we have the Creative Commons version and everything. That's great. But while that was going on, we had this plan for this game. And so part of me was very excited because that was moving up in the queue. And I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, that's the thing I've been itching to work on. So I'm really glad that this has moved up in the queue. But it definitely felt scary in the sense that, like, I have a lot of friends who are creators who rely on the OGL, right? And so I was worried about them. And I was also worried about the whole industry in general, right? Like, for instance, you're very involved in the reporting and media. And luckily, you're also very involved in the reporting and media of a lot of different things. But like, there are people who their whole, their job is based on streaming this game. Their job is based on talking about and giving advice for this game, podcasts and stuff like that. And this hobby can fall apart pretty easily because it doesn't just compete with, it's not like people will leave D&D and necessarily go to Pathfinder in droves or come to the MCDM RPG in droves. They could just go play Baldur's Gate, right? They could just go play Smash Brothers or binge The Wire or take ballroom dancing, right? Any number of other things that compete for their free time. And that was really worrisome to me, that like this could really damage the hobby of RPGs in a way that like would make people just want to leave it and leave a bitter taste in their mouth. So it felt, I felt angry and I felt betrayed and I felt scared for a lot of people. But luckily for me personally, I was like, we do have this cool thing to look forward to as well. But it was, I am glad that folks listened and that's nice. And it was like, it also gave me hope, right? Like there's a lot of things coming up where it'd be great for people to be able to band together on important issues. And if we can do that with the OGL, we can do that with a lot of stuff, right? So that's a hope too, for humanity.
All right, diving back into the MCDM RPG. So, let's talk a little bit about what it is actually. We've heard it's heroic fantasy. We've heard it's cinematic. We know that Matt Colville is like single-handedly responsible, and you too. The two of you talking about it are like single-handedly responsible for like the 4E Renaissance and revival. So what exactly is this game? What does it do, and how do you play it?
Yes, and it's very funny when so Matt put out an open call to writers, and I wrote in my cover letter to him that like I really liked 4E and I believed in his philosophy of like bringing some 4E to 5E, and he still remembers that and still talks about that. So I was like, okay, that was very important in forming a relationship with Matt. So in terms of the MCDM RPG, leaning into this heroic angle is really important for us, right? And that's our sort of our guiding star, because in a game like 5th edition D&D, there are a lot of D20 fantasy games like this, right? Things tend to be very broad, right? You can go have a gothic horror adventure in Ravenloft, you can go have a dungeon crawling adventure in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and you can have a big heroic fantasy adventure in, you know, Rise of Tiamat, right? And all sorts of things in between. D&D wants to be a very flexible rule system that you can do a lot. And I think as a result, there are some things it does very well, and there are some things it doesn't do as well, but it purports to be able to do, which is fine, right? Like, that's great. People can really hack the rules together and do some great things. One of the big strengths of 5e, one that I have benefited from a lot, is that it's a very accessible rule set for a designer to get into and make new stuff for, right? What we want to do is create a game, and it does a few things very well, and those are the kinds of stories that you can tell with it. And so that's why we lean into like heroic, tactical, cinematic, right? And for us, those mean heroic means that, like, this game, the narrative is about saving people and being a good person. It's not really about getting treasure. It's not about survival, right? It's about, like, when you show up, your level 1 character, you're going to feel like you're already one of the Avengers, right? Your power level is going to be high. You're going to have options for cool stuff that you can do, which also ties into tactical. You can make some choices on your turn. It's not just swing my sword again, swing my sword again. Like, no, you've got options for what you can do, very similar to 4E, right? And you are going to be rewarded for heroics that you put forth, right? And part of that is that we also encourage people to keep going, right? When you watch Doctor Strange, you don't see Doctor Strange say, hey, everybody, let's take 8 hours so I can get a 9th level spell slot back, because I just used it in that last fight and I'd like to get it back for this next one we're going to have. That's not what happens. What happens is Doctor Strange finds the energy to like push himself to his limit to get that 9th level spell slot back in the moment he needs it, right? And so our mechanics are looking forward that way. There's a couple of things that we do to support that heroic feel, right? And so the first thing is, a lot of D20 fantasy games are games of attrition, right? And by that, what I mean is, like, you start with all your spell slots, all your hit points, all your rages and wild shapes uses per day, all your your battle master dice, right? And as the day goes on, you lose those things, right? Which means that eventually you have to rest to get those things back. And it also creates this weird sort of combat thing that happens, which is that, like, people hold on to their best stuff until they get to the boss, and then they unload it all on the boss, and then that boss fight that's supposed to be big and epic is over like that, right? Yeah. Doesn't feel very cinematic, right? And it's not very tactical, because you're using that same sort of tactic every adventuring day. So the way our game works is we want the battles to get more interesting the longer they go on, and we want your adventuring day to be more interesting as it goes on. And so one of the mechanics that we have, right, is that everybody has a heroic resource, right? And if you have the beast heart or the talent, you're familiar with this. Your character is managing some kind of resource. So, like, the talent is managing strain, right? And as they're using their powers, they're taking on strain, and they get these debuffs that make things more interesting for them and give them more challenges to overcome. The beast heart builds up ferocity, and they can spend that ferocity on things during a fight to make their companion do these really cool maneuvers, right? The beast heart is an animal companion class. You have this pet, and the pet might be like a boule or a dragon wormling, right? Something cool and monstrous. And so as they build up this ferocity, you can be like, yes, now dragon wormling, use your fire breath because you've got enough to do it. And they might build that back up and be able to do that twice in a fight, right? Or they might have a couple of different things they can do. So you have that heroic resource, which you basically manage during a combat. Whenever you successfully, defeat a combat encounter or solve a puzzle or have a really good negotiation or a complicated skill challenge, right? You get what's called a victory. And your victories improve your powers as well. So, like, maybe during a fight, I will be able to deal extra damage equal to my victories once, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I may be able to, at the start of a fight, I might like remove strain equal to the number of victories I have, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So they make you more powerful. They encourage you to keep going. And that's the idea, right? Is that a hero keeps going, right? They don't stop. They want to keep going until the job is done.
Yeah.
So that's the basic way we support like the heroic narrative in there. The other thing that we do is the roll to hit. We don't have anymore. When you make an attack against somebody, you roll damage and you deal them that damage. And that gets rid of the roll to hit, which is basically a roll to see if you have a turn. Right?
Yeah.
That like if I roll a 1 on my turn, I'm just not doing anything. That's not fun. And it doesn't feel heroic. That can be good for some other pulp games or dungeon crawling games where it's like, oh wow, I really got to do this. But if you want to feel like a hero, you should be doing something effective every round. Heroes have ways that they can like use triggered actions and different powers to mitigate incoming damage, but they have to actively use those things, which also feels heroic and tactical. Yeah.
So diving into like the specific mechanics, obviously if there's no roll to hit, that kind of eliminates the need for a D20. So what dice are we using? Because I remember one of the earliest conversations about this RPG, then when you guys were first like talking about it, there were talks of like using a custom dice, and you guys were like very high on like the Genesis system, like the Star Wars RPG that Fantasy Flight Games uses. So what exactly dice are we using in this game?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the time, the design team was Hannah Rose, Matt, and myself, right? And we were playing a game of Star Wars, the Star Wars Fantasy Flight RPG that Mark Hulmes was running for us, and we were having a blast. We'd all been talking about Andor, right?
Yeah,
we all loved Andor, and we're like, yeah, let's play this game. And so we were very into the funky dice, and Matt had been into them from before. There was I think a Warhammer Fantasy edition that used funky dice. Yeah, and so he was into that. I had played the Star Wars and the Genesis system a lot, and I will say what happened is we are no longer using them because I kept adjusting the math, right? We had these different like numbers of successes you could get, and I kept tweaking the math and like, okay, now the dice should have this many successes on a side and this many surges, right? We had surges that were like lightning bolts, and I kept adjusting, and eventually I got to a place where you were rolling 2d12. Which now I'm like, I didn't know at the time, right, that's what Daggerheart was going to be doing, but now I do. You were rolling 2 custom D12, and they had these different like numbers on the side, and I went and I looked at the curve, right? I like looked at the probability curve, and everybody came out of that test, right, where I'd adjusted the dice, and they were like, this is it. This is the one. It feels great. And I looked at the curve, and it was like within 100th of a decimal place. A 2d6 curve, just regular old 2d6, and it was like, I thought I was so clever. It was like, this one dice has numbers 1 through 9 on it, and this other one has 1 through 3 on it, and you roll them together and you add them up, and I was like, oh, hang on, wait a second, it's this is just 2 to 12, and the probabilities are well, and so I went to Matt and I was like, hey, we just spent like 3 months of development coming up with, we should use 2d6, which is what everybody is using if they're not using a d20, right? And he was like, well, at least we came by it honestly, right? And so that's the system. Is the core of the system is 2d6, adding a modifier that is based on a stat. Right. And that's how you deal damage. So when you deal damage, you're rolling that 2d6. You might be adding more dice. So we have Boon and Bane dice, right? They're D4s. Your Boon die is like, hey, that's good. You add the D4. Your Bane die, you subtract when you roll that dice. And so you might have a Bane if you're attacking from a prone position, right? Or you might have a Bane if you're are being affected by poison. And you can have multiple of each. They cancel each other out 1-to-1. So if you have 2 Boons and 1 Bane, you have 1 Boon, right, on that die roll. And then we also have impact dice, and impact dice are D8s. So when you spend a lot of resources, for instance, on a power, or you gain a lot of strain, for instance, if you're the talent, that power might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 impact dice that you also roll when you roll for damage, right? That make it like a big old damage roll. Now that would be much higher level, right? Our game goes from level 1 to 10. And that's because we want you to actually maybe experience all the levels of play in a campaign that takes a year and a half, because we also don't want to wind up designing stuff for, let's say, and I've done this a lot for D&D, you design stuff for the 20th level of play or the 15th to 20th level of play, but nobody actually uses it.
Nope.
Right? So why design those levels? The idea is we'll have a game that goes from 1 to 10. A 10th level character in our game will be as powerful as a 20th level D&D character. We're just going to get there faster. The increments between levels 1 and 2, you jump up in power faster, right? And so that's the those are sort of the basics of the die mechanics. It's always rolling 2d6. You might be rolling some Boons or Banes, and you might be rolling some impact dice. And the way we put it is the Boons and Banes are the tactical part of the game, right? Because that's like your environment and your positioning and the effects you're under and stuff like that. And the impact dice are cinematic, right? You don't get those taken away. When you're blowing up the place with a big fireball, you always get those impact dice and you can count on them, and that's your cinematic stuff.
So it sounds like obviously tactical implies tabletop, grid-based tabletop. Is that a fair assumption to make?
Yeah, so I would say in our game the grid is not optional, right?
Okay.
Which is, again, I love all kinds of role-playing games, and there are definitely great role-playing games that don't require a grid or allow you to use theater of the mind sometimes and a grid other times. And I'm sure there will be people who look at our game and they're like, you can run some combats without a grid, it's fine. But like, we measure distance in squares, right? So and we say this is going to take up a 3x3 space on the grid, right? And so that is how we're operating. And again, that's part of like that original philosophy. We'd rather whole ass one thing than half ass two things. Can I say ass? Is that fine?
Yeah. We're deep enough into the recording that unless like Pete literally starts with that clip, we're fine. We're fine. We can curse as much as we want to. Don't curse as much as you want to.
I won't. But that'll be it. It's PG-13. I've had it.
Yeah.
I've had my 3. So yeah.
The occasional ass is fine though. So besides combat, what are some other things that the MCDM RPG does well?
Yes. That's a really good question. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, like, what are our different pillars of play? And when we say pillars of play, we mean like, what does our game do well, right? What do we want to do as well as we do combat? Because you can definitely go in and make some checks to investigate a murder scene, for instance, right? Roll some dice, add some modifiers, see if you find clues, that kind of thing. But this game isn't about mysteries, right? So there are heroic things that we think people should be able to do really well. And one of those is negotiation. So we're going to have a robust system for negotiation. And this isn't meant for like all role-playing scenarios, right? So like if you just want to bribe a guard to get into the emperor's room while the emperor is out cavorting around town, that's probably, a role-playing encounter. You might roll a test or two, right? But that would be it. Negotiation for us is like, hey, we're sitting down and we are discussing how can I count on your army's support in this big upcoming fight? How can we decide what we should be doing with this one ring to the life force of a dark lord? How can we hey, persuade this lich that, like, maybe, just maybe, you could give us that evil cursed sword that you have, because it's actually going to help us in our quest. And what can we do for you? So things that are like going to sort of help define your adventure, right? We want to have a system for that. And we've already started testing that. It's gone through a bunch of iterations. Started out like almost too as many things do, like way too crunchy and mechanical, and we're getting it to a place where it feels good. It feels like there are actual mechanics supporting things here, but we're still able to role play. We're still able to be in character and have fun. And it basically depends on in order for someone to want to negotiate with you, they have to have an interest in that, but also be reluctant, right? Like, because if you're interested and there's nothing holding you back, we don't need to negotiate. You'll say yes, we'll work together. If you're not interested and you're just reluctant, you'll say no. So there needs to be this tension there, and it is all about making arguments that appeal to that NPC to raise their interest level and sort of reduce their reluctance, right? And then there are all these different outcomes where it's like, at the end, every time you make them an offer, they will say, oh, let me look at your interest level here. Okay, it's here. Well, that means they're going to say, no, I don't want to do that for you, but I could do this. Okay. Well, what if I say, we'll make another argument, blah, blah, blah. And they'll say, like, okay, you know what? I am willing to do what you want to do, but you still need to do this other thing for me. And so you can keep trying to raise, and sometimes if your argument fails, it'll knock them back down, right? There are pitfalls. Every NPC has like some pitfalls on the subject where it's like, if you bring that up, they're going to be mad and it's going to lower their interest level. And that eventually they also have a patience score. And the patience score slowly ticks down every time you make an argument until they say, okay, look, this is my final offer for this negotiation. This is what you can do, right? So that's going to be a big part of it. There are ways that you'll be able to talk to people in a negotiation and make arguments and never need to roll dice. If you make the right arguments that appeal to an NPC's motivation, you'll be able to get what you want without having to roll dice. If you make an argument that doesn't appeal to a motivation, but it's logical and it's sound, then you might need to roll some dice to try to convince them to see things your way, right? So negotiation is one. The other thing that we want to do is have a Rust system for crafting and research, right? Where it's like, hey, when you're resting in your downtime between adventures, you can research how to do things, make new spells, build like personal constructs who can help you out, hone your magic item to make it better, go to training, right? That sort of thing. So we want there to be like a fairly robust, basically downtime system that people can use to improve and make their characters better. So we think of sort of our big pillars are like negotiation, and it is going to be crafting and research and combat, right? Like those are kind of the big things. And then we're going to introduce, probably through supplements, the politics pillar, which is negotiation with organizations like Kingdoms of Warfare stuff and building strongholds and that kind of thing. So we still want to take those things that people love about MCDM and bring them into the game too, but probably not in the core.
So that actually brings up another question. I do want to wrap this up, and I'll get to. I want to talk about the actual Backerkit to wrap things up. But I did want to ask, because you brought up, strongholds of followers and Kingdoms of Warfare. Are you going to make new versions of the stuff that MCDM is known for, but for this new system?
Yes. So already, right, we've right now we're determining what's going to be in the core of this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we do know that we want to do things like we want to have a talent in this game, right?
Yeah.
We want to have a beast heart in this game. We want to have, so Flea Mortals monsters, like our monsters, we also want to be fun to run and fun to fight. And we are looking at Flea Mortals and saying, like, what do people really like about this book? What made it successful? What did we like about this book? What made it fun to work on? Let's make sure we're bringing those things into our monster book that we're creating for this, right? So that's a big part of it, is looking at those past things. We do want to bring stuff from Kingdoms and Warfare, and we want to bring stuff from the Chain of Acheron, which was the stream Matt did. We want to bring stuff from Strongholds and Followers. Those things will likely be in some supplements that we have planned. The idea is that, like, hopefully eventually we have 3 sort of different settings that are interconnected, right? We have like Vesloria, which is medieval fantasy Europe. And then on that same planet of Orden, there's a place called Capital, which is where the Chain was in their campaign. And that is like a big city that is sort of like a Renaissance Italy meets ancient Rome, with a lot of backstabbing and intrigue and stuff like that. And then we have the Timescape, and the Timescape is, so if Orden, the planet that both of these places are on, is here, the Timescape is like Guardians of the Galaxy, because you're going from Orden to other planes, to other planets and things like that, almost like Spelljammer. But in a, I would say more in a, there's a sci-fi novel called A Fire Upon the Deep, and I would say it's heavily inspired by A Fire Upon the Deep.
Love it.
Oh, good. Yes. So you will see the hope is that we'd like to create like a Capital product line, a Vesloria product line, and a Timescape product line, and the support for things will come out in those product lines. Right now, that's the best laid plan right now. That could change as we move forward. So I just want to caveat all that, but like, that's what we're thinking. We've been talking about that for a while, and it really excites us. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. So, let's wrap things up with the Backerkit itself, the Backerkit campaign itself.
Yes.
What are people actually going to get in this? What are you guys actually putting out with this Backerkit?
It's a great question. So we're going to make 2 books, is the hope. And so the 2 books are a book that is Heroes, right? And that book is essentially your player's handbook. It's going to have everything you need to understand the core rules for combat and negotiation and crafting. It's going to have your character classes and character creation rules. Your ancestries are going to be in there. It's also going to have, in addition to that, magic items, because we do think magic items sort of belong in a player book so that the players can see them, especially if they're going to be able to craft them, right? And it will also have advice for the director, which is what we call the GM in our game. So there will be a section of like, hey, how to run things and how to put things together. So think of that as the core rules without the monsters, basically. And the other book is the monsters, right? And that is going to be the Flea Mortals for this book. It's going to have a lot of the same stat blocks. If you have Flea Mortals, we're going to bring many of those creatures over and convert them, but we're also going to add more, right? Because Flea Mortals covers a good chunk of what you would need, but we may lose things like the villain parties, the environments in Flea Mortals, to make space for more factions of creatures, more other types of creatures, that you might want to see. And we'll also have, more rules as we need them for creatures, maybe rules about like how to easily create some creatures. We'd like to be able to give that. We like to give people a look at our design. So those are the 2 things that we're going to have. We'll probably have pledge levels for PDFs of those, and also for hardcovers. And you'll be able to get just the hero book on its own, or you can get it bundled with the monster book, both in PDF, hardcover. Those different flavors will be available to folks. We do have a couple of stretch goals too. So since we're already live, I think we can talk about this. That we have a stretch goal where we would like to essentially build out some digital tools for this game that are like sort of first party, right?
Oh,
We would like to hire a team that is going to work with us and license a VTT, right? And we're going to see how that goes. But that's the idea. Is we think that those things are most successful when they are made for a game, right? And so that's a pretty big stretch goal that we have in mind, is that like we would ideally, we'd like a VTT of our own and our own suite of digital tools that we can easily get in there and edit and make updates to, and people can, create stuff for as well if they want to, because we'd like this game to be very open, and we'd like people to, we'd like to create a community, support a community of creators, because gosh, it's fun, and it's fun to be part of a community of creators, and creators have been very good to us, so we'd like to be good back to them.
Okay. One, and kind of like on that note, I did want to bring up adventures for this. What are your plans for adventures for this?
That's a really good question. So we would like to be able to have, when the game comes out, a lot of short adventures that people can sort of pick up and build their own campaign paths on, right? So sort of the back in the day, the 32-page adventure modules that you could pick up and run, right? Like we'd like to have a lot of those, which the good news is we need to create a lot of those for playtesting, right? Like so that people can test the game itself. So we're developing some of those now that people can, and those will likely be available in some digital format that people can then use and run. We also then have plans to create some longer adventures as well. We don't know what form they're going to take, but they will probably take some form of, in addition to PDF, some kind of tactile form. Matt and I both like box sets. We've never really made a box set before, so we don't know what goes into it. But I think we'd love to be able to say like, cool, here's a box, and right, it's got the adventure booklet, and it's got a map that you can put out. It's got handouts and tokens and maps that you can use and stuff like that. So that's we're looking at longer adventures too, and hopefully at launch having some PDF digital adventures and stuff that people will be able to grab and use.
Okay. Well, on that note, everyone should go and check out the Backerkit campaign, which of course is live as of the time that we are posting this. So no excuse to check out the MCDM RPG. We're looking forward to this. Matt and James and the entire team that they've gathered are some of our favorite creators, of all time. So we are really looking forward to seeing what they cook up. We can't wait. We're going to be backers. And this is totally unprompted, not an ad, just our genuine love for the MCDM product. So go and check it out. And if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments section. Maybe we'll do a follow-up video somewhere down the line where we'll talk about the game more. I'm sure it's going to come up because this is a YouTube channel about tabletop RPGs. So, thank you so much, James, for coming on. This has been an absolute blast. I love talking with you, especially about games. So we should do this again sometime.
Yes, thank you for having me on. Thank you to producer Pete for everything he's doing. Can I say smash that like and subscribe button? I never get to say that.
Yeah,
so smash
absolutely.
that like and subscribe, because the character sheet is awesome. I watch all of your videos. They're really great. It is a pleasure to be here. I read all of the stuff that you write, Christian. So thank you for all that you do to grow this community and grow this hobby. And it's awesome. And I can't wait for all of the amazing games that are going to be coming out over the next year. There's so much cool stuff for people to check out. This is a great time to be in RPGs. It's awesome.
Yeah. No. Big things on the horizon for 2024. And the character sheet will have them all. So on that note, thank you as always for watching.